Elon Musk, known around the world for reaching the heavens, now walked with the quiet weight of someone searching for something earthbound. He just didn't know what. And then he slowed. To his left stood a church. Small, plain, its bricks a deep red softened by age, its wooden doors closed but not locked. It didn't call attention to itself, no neon sign, no loud music spilling from inside. Just the stillness of a place that had seen sorrow and joy in equal measure. He hadn't meant to stop, but something, perhaps a memory, perhaps something deeper, made his steps falter. That's when he saw the priest. He stepped from a narrow side door, as if emerging from the past itself. He was old. His hair was white, his gait slow but sure, and his face serene, not in the way of someone without grief, but someone who had made peace with it. His eyes found Elon's immediately, not in surprise, but as if he'd been waiting. They looked at each other in silence. Elon felt a strange tightening in his chest, a flicker of recognition he couldn't explain. The old man began walking toward him, carrying something close to his chest, a small wooden box, darkened by years of careful keeping. "Mr. Musk," the priest asked, his voice gentle but unwavering, like a thread pulled through time. Elon hesitated, startled not by the name, but by the way it was spoken, like someone addressing not a celebrity, but a son. "Yes," he answered cautiously. "I'm Elon." The priest nodded slowly, the way someone does when a moment long predicted finally arrives. "I have something for you," he said, holding the box more visibly now. "I've been keeping it for many years." Elon looked at it, no label, no inscription, just wood, smoothed by time and reverence. "What is it?" he asked, the tension in his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. "It belonged to your mother," the priest said softly. "She entrusted it to me before she passed." Something inside Elon went quiet. "My mother," he repeated, barely above a whisper. "Yes," the priest said. "She asked that I give it to you only when I felt you were ready." The words struck him harder than he expected. "When I felt you were ready." Not a date, not a will, not a schedule, but readiness. As if this moment had waited for his heart, not his calendar. He took the box slowly, holding it like something both sacred and fragile. He couldn't look away from it. The brass clasp was delicate, almost old-fashioned. The wood still held a faint scent, something like lavender or maybe memory itself. He didn't open it. The priest, seeing this, spoke again. "There's a quiet place inside if you'd like to sit." Elon glanced toward the open side door of the church. Part of him wanted to turn and walk away. The other part, quieter, deeper, wanted to walk in and never leave. He nodded. The sanctuary was dim and cool, filled with the scent of aged wood and candle wax. No grandeur, no spectacle, just pews, a modest altar, and light filtering through stained glass. He sat in the back row, the box still in his hands. The priest joined him, but said nothing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "She used to sit here sometimes," the priest said at last. "She never asked for anything, just sat quietly. Sometimes she cried, but mostly she prayed for you." Elon didn't respond. His throat was tight. "She said you were always reaching upward," the priest continued, "but she prayed you'd never forget to look around." Those words pierced something old and tender inside him. "She never told me about this," he finally whispered. "She didn't want to burden you," the priest replied. "She wanted it to be a gift, not a weight. Something to carry only when your hands were open." Elon nodded slowly, understanding in a way that had nothing to do with intellect. Still, he didn't open the box. Instead, he looked around the sanctuary, the dust particles swirling in the sunlight, the worn hymnals, the cross on the wall. His mother had been here, in these very pews, praying for him, believing in him, perhaps even forgiving him for things he didn't know he'd done. He looked back at the box and felt, for the first time in a long time, that something in him was cracking, not breaking, but opening. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. "That's how you know you are," the priest replied, his voice softer now. "The ones who think they're ready usually aren't." And with that, Elon exhaled. Not a sigh of defeat, a surrender, the quiet kind. Dear viewer, if this moment stirred something in you, maybe a memory, a name, a silence you've been holding, stay with us. This story is just beginning, and it's told for those who still carry hearts that remember. And if it moved you even a little, I'd be honored if you clicked like. Not for the algorithm, but as a quiet sign between you and whoever you miss that their love still echoes. And if you want to walk with us through the rest of this journey, you're always welcome to subscribe. No noise, no pressure, just stories made for souls who still feel. We'll keep the light on for you. Elon held the box like it was made of lead. It wasn't large, small enough to rest in both hands, but it carried a weight that had nothing to do with wood or brass. His fingers pressed gently against the smooth surface, tracing its corners, as though he might learn something just by touching it. The priest didn't rush him. Instead, he stepped back and gestured toward the open side door of the church. "Would you like to come inside?" he asked, his voice calm, already knowing the answer. Elon nodded, still not speaking, and followed. Inside, the sanctuary welcomed them with a hush that seemed untouched by time. The scent of old pews, candle wax, and stone lingered like something sacred. Sunlight filtered through narrow stained glass windows, casting gentle ribbons of blue, gold, and rose across the worn wooden floor. It wasn't a grand space. No gilded altar, no ornate marble. Just wooden benches, a simple cross, an air that seemed to carry the breath of decades of whispered prayers. Elon sat down on the last pew, furthest from the altar. The box remained unopened in his lap, his hands still resting on it, as if he were holding something that might slip away if he let go. The priest sat beside him, not too close, not speaking, only present. For a moment, neither man moved. Then a quiet voice broke the silence. "She used to come here, you know," the priest said, eyes ahead. Elon blinked slowly, his face unmoving. "She always had faith," he murmured, "even when I lost mine." The priest offered no reply. He didn't need to. A shaft of light filtered through the stained glass above, casting a soft blue glow across Elon's face. His jaw tightened. Something about the air in this place made it harder to keep old defenses standing. They crumbled in silence, in memory, in light. Finally, he looked down at the box. His fingers hovered over the clasp for a long moment before he lifted it. The lid creaked softly, revealing the contents inside. A folded envelope, yellowed slightly with age, and beside it a photograph. Elon reached for the photo first. It was a candid shot. He was maybe 5, cradled in his mother's arms. She was laughing at something just outside the frame, her head tilted, eyes crinkled with joy. He was clutching her necklace, unaware of the camera. There was something so unfiltered about it, before the noise, before the world got loud. He stared at it. She looked so alive. The muscles around his mouth twitched, resisting emotion that had waited far too long to be felt. He set the photo aside and picked up the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably hers, looped, careful, and elegant. Elon was written in blue ink, nothing else. Just his name, as if she knew the rest would come when he opened it. He ran a thumb across the letters like they might still be warm. The scent of the paper rose, softly floral, with the faintest trace of her perfume. Not the expensive kind. The kind that reminded you of clean sheets and lavender oil and early mornings when someone you loved was still alive. He swallowed hard. "May I read it?" he asked, his voice cracking. The priest turned to him, eyes warm with understanding. "Of course," he said. "It's for you, and only for you." Elon nodded, his eyes already glossed with tears. He opened the envelope with delicate care, as if even a tear in the paper might undo something sacred. He unfolded the letter. The words hit before he even read them. The shape of her handwriting, the curves, the rhythm, it was like seeing her voice on paper. And then he began, "My dearest Elon, if you're reading this, it means time has done what time always does. And I'm no longer where you can reach me with a phone call or a plane ticket. But I hope, somehow, I've remained close, just beneath your skin, in the space between your thoughts. I asked the priest to hold on to this until he believed your heart was open. Not because I ever doubted you, but because I knew that the world would ask you to build walls to survive it. And I hoped when the day came, you'd be ready to let one of those walls come down. His breath caught. He paused, staring at the words. His mother's voice echoed through the syllables, steady and familiar. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve and continued. You were always reaching, even as a child. 4 stars for questions, for something more. I never tried to hold you back. But I worried sometimes that in reaching so far, you might forget the hands that held you first. There's so much I wish I had said again and again until it engraved itself on your heart. So I'll say it now. You are enough. You were always enough. Not for what you built or invented or led, but because you were mine. And if there are things you still carry, regrets, distance, old wounds, I want you to set them down. You don't have to carry them into the rest of your life. His shoulders began to tremble. The words blurred, but he kept reading. Love is not earned. It's offered. Freely. And I offered it to you every day, even the days you couldn't see it. If you remember anything, let it be this. You were loved in every season. Even in your silence. Even in your mistakes. And you still are. He folded the letter slowly, his hands trembling. The sanctuary remained quiet, but something in it had shifted. The walls held his grief now. The pews his longing. The light his healing. He didn't speak. The priest didn't ask. He simply closed the box as if to protect the words inside and rested it gently on the pew beside him. And then for a long time he sat, not as the man the world knew, but as a son trying to remember how to breathe again. My dearest Elon. That first line alone cracked something open in his chest. The letters, curled and delicate, written in a blue ink slightly faded with time, felt like the soft echo of her voice. Elon stared at the page, unable to move for a moment, afraid that even the simple act of blinking might somehow break the spell. She had written to him. Not the man, not the public figure, not the inventor or the headline, but to her son. He took a breath, shallow, hesitant, and continued reading. My dearest Elon, I wonder how old you are now. I wonder if you still drink your coffee too hot, or if you still forget to sleep when your mind is busy chasing new stars. I'm writing this not knowing when you'll read it, only that I love you now, and I will love you then. That part never changes. The softness in her tone struck him immediately. There was no judgment, no warning, only warmth, and something else too. A quiet sadness beneath the ink. You've always been so brilliant, so restless. Even as a little boy, your eyes were always searching, always questioning. It made me proud. But if I'm honest, it also scared me. Elon's hands began to tremble. The paper crinkled softly under his grip. I was afraid that in reaching for everything, you might lose the one thing no one else could give you, yourself. He looked up for a moment, staring at nothing. The priest remained beside him, hands folded, gaze lowered, a quiet guardian of the space between grief and grace. Elon's throat tightened. He forced himself to keep going. You will change the world, my son. I always knew that. But please, promise me you won't forget your soul along the way. He closed his eyes, the words ringing in his head like a hymn he hadn't heard since childhood. She had seen it coming. The hunger, the loneliness beneath the accolades, the isolation beneath the innovation. Real power doesn't come from building things, Elon. It comes from caring for them, for people, for lives, for love. His fingers grazed the edge of the letter like they might touch her through the page. She hadn't written this as someone who needed his attention. She had written it as someone who knew he would be too far for too long and still loved him anyway. I know the world will put you on a pedestal. It already has. But I hope you'll remember to kneel sometimes. Not because you're less than anyone, but because humility will remind you of what you're not meant to carry alone. His breathing grew uneven. He remembered how she used to kneel by his bed, even when he pretended to be asleep, whispering prayers, stroking his hair back with fingers soft from laundry and late nights. I hope you still love honey on warm bread in the morning. I hope you remember our long walks, your little hand in mine. I used to sing you lullabies, remember? You'd always say, just one more, Mommy, and I always said yes. Always. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The memories weren't just words now. They were there, sitting beside him, pressing into the pew, dancing in the beams of colored light that streamed through the stained glass. You always wanted to fly. You were never meant for ordinary things. But my darling, don't forget the ground where you learned to walk, the little hands you once held, the voices that shape your silence. He blinked hard, eyes burning. The church was still. The priest didn't speak, didn't shift, only watched from the corner of his eye, the way someone watches a soul come undone in the holiest of ways. If this letter has found you, it means something in you has softened, or maybe broken. But brokenness isn't the end, Elon. It's where light gets in. He pressed the letter to his chest suddenly, unable to read more, as though the air itself had grown too heavy. His mother's voice lived in those words. Not a memory, not a ghost, but present, somehow impossibly in the here and now. The silence stretched, sacred, undisturbed. When he could breathe again, he unfolded the last part of the letter. If this has reached you, it means there's still time. Time to love more. Time to forgive what you couldn't. Time to return, not to a place, but to yourself. You are still my boy. Always. Tears slipped down his cheeks now, silent and slow. He sat back, folding the letter with trembling hands, as gently as one might fold a child's blanket. He held it close, pressing it to his heart like it might mend something inside. For a long time, he said nothing. Just breathed. Just felt. Then, in a voice smaller than he meant, he asked, "Why did she give this to you?" The priest turned to him. His pale blue eyes held no surprise, only understanding. "Because she knew," he said quietly, "that you wouldn't listen to anyone else." Elon looked at him, eyes red but steady. "She trusted you," he said. The priest nodded slowly. "She believed the words would reach you when the noise of the world finally stopped." Elon looked down at the letter again. No headlines, no algorithms, no boardrooms, just ink, paper, love, and the voice of the one person who had loved him before anyone else even knew his name. He whispered softly, not to the priest, not to himself, but perhaps to the memory now sitting with him in that quiet church. "I hear you, Mom." And in that moment, it wasn't silence that filled the space. It was her voice. The priest took a breath, not out of weariness, but out of reverence, like someone choosing the right key before opening a locked door. "Because," he said gently, "she knew you wouldn't listen if it came any other way." Elon didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth of the statement hovered in the space between them like a delicate thread, not accusing, not condemning, but undeniably real. The priest turned slightly on the pew, folding his hands. His voice, when it came again, was softer, less measured. "I met your mother during a storm. Not outside, but inside her," he said. "She came here one afternoon, maybe 15 years ago. She had just argued with you, I think. Something heavy had passed between you, though she never said exactly what." Elon looked down, his fingers unconsciously folding and unfolding the edge of the letter again. She didn't come here to be heard. She came to pray, to cry, to leave something behind. The priest's eyes found the far wall of the sanctuary, as if seeing it all over again. "I remember her sitting where you are now. She didn't ask for advice. She didn't need words. She just wept into her hands and whispered your name." Elon's breath caught. "She said she was afraid," the priest continued. "Not for your safety, but for your soul. She told me, 'I fear I'm losing my son, not to anger or bitterness, but to pride.'" The words landed gently, but their weight was unmistakable. Elon lowered his head, eyes closed. Guilt curled through his ribs like smoke. There had been so many moments, years even, where he dismissed her faith as a relic of a world he had outgrown. He had called it naive, sentimental, weak, and yet she had clung to it, not for herself, but for him. "She asked me," the priest said, with tears in her eyes, if I would pray for you. Every day, until the day you might come back to yourself. Elon's hands tightened in his lap. He felt shame and gratitude twist together inside him, two emotions that rarely shared space. He had been so far away, and yet her love had been closer than he'd ever imagined. The priest reached into the folds of his coat and drew out a small, worn notebook, leather-bound, the edges softened by time and handling. "She left this with me too," he said. "Didn't tell me what to do with it. Just said, if he ever comes back here, give him this." He placed the notebook in Elon's hands, gently, reverently. Elon turned it over slowly. It was smaller than he expected, about the size of his palm. He opened it. The pages were covered in her handwriting. Not formal journal entries, just lines. Fragments, prayers, little pieces of her heart, left behind like breadcrumbs. "Lord, guide my son when I no longer can. Teach him to rest when the world only teaches him to run. Not success, Lord, mercy. Not genius, gentleness. Guard him not from pain, but from becoming numb to it. Keep his heart from turning to stone." Elon couldn't breathe. The words weren't grand or poetic. They were simple, raw. They bore the fingerprints of a mother's private ache, words never meant for anyone else's eyes. And now here they were, resting in the hands of the very son she had written them for. He held the notebook to his chest. Not like an artifact, but like a part of her that had lived on, just waiting for him to be still enough to hear it. "I called her faith an illusion once," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Said she was clinging to stories instead of truth." The priest didn't respond with defense or correction. He simply said, "She never stopped believing in you." The sanctuary swelled with quiet. Not the absence of sound, but presence. The presence of something sacred and unseen, like the echo of a lullaby long since sung, still hovering in the air. Elon's eyes scanned the words again, stopping at one line that had been written in bold strokes. "If he forgets who he is, remind him he was always loved before he was anything else." He closed the notebook slowly, holding it like a relic, like something he had waited for without knowing. All those years chasing futures, launching rockets, building dreams, and the real lifeline had been written in silence, tucked away in a priest's coat pocket, never seeking attention, only readiness. He turned to the priest, voice uneven. "What do I do with this now?" The priest didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the altar, simple, wooden, and worn. "You listen," he said finally, "and then you decide." Elon followed his gaze to the front of the church. There was no one there. No music, no sermon, just light spilling across the steps. But something in it felt like invitation, like the past was no longer chasing him, but waiting patiently for him to choose. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man who had failed. He felt like a son who had just been found. Elon sat quietly, still holding the small notebook as though it might vanish if he let go. The silence between him and the priest wasn't awkward. It was the kind that grows only between two people who are not strangers to sorrow. The air held the weight of the letter, the prayers, and the unfinished conversations that echo long after someone is gone. He turned to the priest finally, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he said. "I feel like she's trying to tell me something, but I don't know how to understand it." The priest didn't look surprised. He gave a slow nod, as though he'd been waiting for that question. "She wanted you to understand three things," he said gently. "Not just with your mind, but with your life." Elon straightened slightly, his brow furrowed. The priest continued, calm and assured. "The first," he said, "was about compassion." Elon tilted his head slightly, listening. "She wanted you to know that compassion is not weakness. It's strength, a quiet kind of strength that most people overlook." The priest looked toward the altar, as if the words he was saying had been spoken there before. "She saw in you a heart that was strong," he said, "but she also saw how the world was teaching you to harden it, to guard it, to armor it." Elon's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth of that had lived in him for years. She used to say, the priest continued, that the heart is a muscle, and the more you protect it from pain, the weaker it becomes. But when you let it feel for real, it grows. A long pause passed. Then came the second lesson. Humility, the priest said. True humility. Not false modesty. Not self-doubt. But the kind of humility that lets you say, I need others. Elon blinked. Something in his shoulders sagged slightly, as though the memory of old walls, ones he'd built himself, were suddenly returning to view. She told me once, the priest said, that you kept pushing people away not because you didn't love them, but because you didn't know how to let them see your fears. Elon looked down, pressing his fingers into the edge of the pew. She was right, he admitted quietly. The priest nodded slowly. She believed that being great didn't mean being untouchable. She wanted you to walk among people, not above them. Elon's thoughts swirled: boardrooms, headlines, closed doors, lost friendships, long silences. I thought vulnerability would slow me down, he whispered. No, the priest said gently. It would have reminded you that you're human. The words hung in the air like soft incense, drifting into corners that hadn't seen light in years. Then, after a long breath, the priest spoke again. The third lesson, he said, is the hardest one. Forgiveness. Elon turned away slightly. His face tightened, not in anger, but in restraint. She believed, the priest continued, that forgiveness isn't just a gift to the one who hurt you. It's a release for yourself, a way to stop bleeding into the rest of your life. Elon's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. She knew, he said, how I felt about my father. The priest didn't interrupt. Elon stared at the floor. There were so many things he never said. And the things he did say, I still hear them sometimes. Not with his voice, but mine. The priest turned toward him now, slowly, his pale blue eyes steady and full of kindness. She knew you carried that weight, he said, and she knew it would follow you until you chose to set it down. Elon swallowed hard. His hands were clenched now, resting on his knees. Maybe I don't know how, he said. The priest nodded again. That's all right. Most people don't. But it begins with wanting to stop hurting yourself by holding onto someone else's failure. The stillness returned. And then the priest asked very gently, if she were here, right now, what would she say to you? Elon didn't hesitate. She'd say, he paused. His voice cracked. Then, with trembling lips, she'd say, I'm still her boy. The priest smiled, not with pride, but with quiet recognition. He reached out and placed a hand lightly on Elon's shoulder. The gesture was simple. No sermon, no scripture, just presence. Then start from there, he said softly. And in that moment, it was as if the years peeled away, not erased but forgiven. Elon wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't even a man struggling to understand his mother's love. He was just a son beginning again. Elon rose from the pew slowly, the leather-bound notebook still in his hands. His fingers tightened around it as he moved down the aisle, past rows of empty benches toward the front of the sanctuary. His footsteps echoed softly against the wood, not loud, just present. It wasn't the altar that called him forward, not exactly. It was something quieter, something older, as though the air itself remembered him. He climbed the 3 shallow steps, crossed in front of the altar rail, and sat on the wide wooden bench just beneath the stained glass window. There he exhaled not from exertion, but from the slow unraveling of something tightly wound inside him. Closing his eyes, he let the silence take him, and slowly memory came. It wasn't sharp, not at first. It drifted in like the smell of something baking in the next room, a fragrance so familiar it hurts. The kitchen from his childhood appeared behind his closed eyes, not as a perfect image, but as a sensation. Warmth, vanilla, the crackle of something frying in a cast iron pan. Music, the kind she used to hum while she moved about the house. A radio that never stayed on one station for long. Afrikaans lullabies in the late afternoon. Her voice, softer than the words themselves. He saw her hands first, gathering his hair gently, parting it with her fingers, brushing out the tangles. She always sang while she combed his hair, her her voice low and private, like the melody belonged only to the two of them. He smiled, not the proud, photo smile he wore in meetings, but something gentler, something only she would have recognized. The scene shifted. Now he was a boy again, racing barefoot across the dry grass of their backyard. The sun was high. The grass was itchy on his ankles. He was laughing, running without direction, arms outstretched like wings. The memory played not like a film, but like a feeling. His own voice, younger, echoed with joy. And then, her voice, a whisper carried on memory's wind. "You used to be afraid of the dark, remember?" He nodded to no one, still with eyes shut. But the dark hadn't been about shadows or monsters. It had been the ache of an empty hallway when the light went out. The silence after a door clicked shut. The distance between his room and hers. The dark was never the absence of light. It was the absence of her arms. Another memory surged. The sharp fall off a small bicycle. Gravel. Blood at the knee. A wheel still spinning behind him. And then her footsteps running. Her arms scooping him up like he weighed nothing. No scolding, just hushes and kisses on his forehead. He could still feel the cotton of her dress against his cheek. She had always come, even when he pushed her away with silence, even when he mocked the things she held sacred. She came with tea when he was angry, with silence when he was distant, with tenderness when he was too proud to ask. He opened his eyes slowly. The sanctuary was unchanged, but his breathing wasn't. It came deeper now, less guarded. He turned his gaze to the stained glass panel above, where soft colors painted the wood with hues of blue and rose. He whispered to no one, "Why do we only see these things after they're gone?" His voice barely reached the space beyond his lips, but it lingered there. A moment passed, then a gentle sound of footsteps on old wood. The priest approached quietly and sat beside him without a word. They both faced forward, eyes not on each other, but on the altar. It was the priest who spoke first, his voice low. "Because real love," he said, "is quiet. It doesn't ask to be seen. It doesn't raise its voice. It wraps around you until you forget it's there. And when it's gone, the silence reminds you of what it held." Elon nodded slowly. The words settled over him like a blanket, warm but heavy with meaning. He looked down at the notebook in his lap, then closed his hand over it with care, as if it were a hand he could still hold. For the first time since arriving, he didn't feel far from her. He didn't feel far from himself. "I want to go home," he said, more to the space than to the priest. The priest glanced sideways. "You mean your childhood house?" Elon shook his head. "No, I mean a different kind of home. Not a place, a feeling." The priest waited. "A home where I don't have to be everything," he said. "Where I can just be her son. Not someone people quote. Not someone expected to know everything." The priest smiled softly. "And you can," he said. "You can go there. Not through maps, but through memory. Through how you live now." Elon looked up again. The light above the altar had shifted slightly, bathing the wooden cross in amber. "I still have time to honor her," he said. "Even now." The priest didn't reply with words. He simply reached out and placed a hand gently over Elon's on the notebook. The gesture was simple, quiet, but it was enough. And in that moment, surrounded by old wood and colored light and unspeakable memory, Elon felt it again. Not loss, but return. The silence had settled again, deep and still, like dust floating through late afternoon light. Elon sat quietly near the altar, the leather-bound notebook of his mother's prayers still resting in his lap, though now untouched. The colors from the stained glass window had shifted, casting longer shadows. The priest watched him for a moment, then spoke, his tone gentle but deliberate. "And your father?" The question landed softly, but not without weight. Elon's expression changed almost immediately. His jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to the floorboards. The warmth that had filled his face minutes earlier vanished, replaced by a cooler, more guarded stillness. The priest didn't press. He simply waited. Elon's voice came low, almost mechanical. "She knew," he said, "that it was a sore place." The priest nodded, eyes steady, encouraging. He wasn't violent, Elon clarified, just distant, demanding. Everything had to be done a certain way. His way. He paused, searching the shadows on the floor as if they might help him piece the words together. He didn't believe in praise, he continued. Said it made people soft. Said excellence was the minimum. There was no bitterness in the way he said it, only a tired kind of truth, one that had calcified over years. I spent so much of my life trying to hear him say he was proud of me. Just once. That's all I wanted. He looked up then, not at the priest, but toward the far end of the sanctuary, as if somewhere buried deep in the quiet, there might still be a version of his father who was listening. When I launched the first rocket, he said slowly, he didn't call. The priest didn't interrupt. I called him, told him we'd succeeded, that the engine had ignited, the trajectory had held. You know what he said? He turned to the priest now, a bitter smile playing at the edge of his lips. He said, "Let me know when it lands." The words hung in the air, sharp despite the years. He always found a way to make it smaller. The things I built, the things I dreamed. Even when I thought I'd finally impressed him, he'd shrug. The priest remained quiet. His listening was steady, generous, like a well that never echoed back. My mother tried, Elon added. She'd say, "He's proud, Elon. He just doesn't know how to show it." She always gave him that mercy. "And did you believe her?" the priest asked gently. Elon exhaled, slow and uncertain. "I wanted to." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, fingers loosely clasped. But deep down, he said, "I think I was always chasing the moment. That one moment where he'd look at me and not see a problem to fix, but a son worth loving." The priest lowered his eyes. "Maybe that's why I worked so hard," Elon murmured. "Maybe it was never about the stars. Maybe I was just trying to be enough for him." The admission sat there, trembling and unguarded. The priest turned slightly toward him, speaking not with challenge, but with careful honesty. "Sometimes," he said, "we try to become extraordinary just to prove to someone who hurt us that they were wrong." Elon's breath caught. He looked over, startled, not because the words were harsh, but because they were true. "I never thought of it like that," he said. The priest nodded. "Wounds don't always bleed. Some grow roots. Quietly. They shape the way we walk, the way we build, even the way we love." Elon stared ahead for a long moment. "And what if I can't forgive him?" he asked. "What if I never want to?" The priest's response came, without hesitation. "Then it will be like keeping a fire alive," he said. "Not to warm yourself, but to stay angry. And that kind of fire doesn't just burn what hurt you. It burns you." Elon didn't reply right away. He looked down at his hands, weathered by work, by design, by time. They had built so much, but they had never been able to build peace. "I don't want to carry it anymore," he said at last. "The ache, the weight." His voice was softer now, not defeated, but stripped down. The priest placed a hand lightly on the back of the pew between them, not touching him, but near enough to be felt. "Then put it down," he said. "You don't need his apology to find your peace. Forgiveness is not for the one who failed you. It's for the one who survived." Elon nodded slowly. There was no dramatic shift in the air, no thunderclap of revelation, just a quiet, internal loosening, like a knot slowly coming undone after years of tension. He sat back and let out a long, unguarded breath. The first crack in the wall of pride wasn't loud, but it was real, and it let in something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Room. Room for something new. Room for healing. Room maybe for mercy. Elon sat quietly, his gaze lifted toward the stained glass window above the altar. The colored panes told stories he'd never really studied before, scenes of saints, of angelic figures, of hands raised in blessing. And scattered among them, tucked into the patterns like constellations, were stars. Literal stars, tiny golden bursts set into the halos, into the skies above the saints' heads. It startled him a little. The blending of two worlds he'd always thought were incompatible. "Stars and saints," he murmured aloud. "Never noticed that before." The priest, still seated beside him, followed his eyes upward but said nothing at first. Elon turned his head slightly. "I never understood her faith," he admitted. "Not really." The priest waited. "She talked about God like he was someone who actually showed up," Elon continued, as if she could feel him in the room. "I used to think it was a coping mechanism, a crutch." He paused, a little ashamed of the bluntness of his own memory. But she was smarter than that. She didn't believe out of ignorance. She chose to believe. "She did," the priest agreed gently. "And she never saw science and faith as enemies." Elon nodded, remembering. "She used to say that science and faith only clash when one forgets to be humble. She believed they both search for truth, just through different instruments." "She told me once," the priest said with a fond smile, "that the sky above her son's rockets was the same heaven she prayed under." Elon smiled faintly. "She really said that?" "Word for word." He looked back at the stained glass. The light filtering through it warmed his face, painting it in soft hues of blue and gold. "I remember her praying," he said quietly, "when things were hard, when we had nothing. She'd whisper, not as if begging, but like she was checking in, like she trusted she was being heard." "That's faith," the priest said, "not needing to see the answer to believe the question matters." Elon let the silence rest a moment before saying, "I always thought faith was an emotional weakness, something people clung to when they couldn't bear uncertainty." And now, Elon's brow furrowed as he considered the question. He looked at his own hands, fingers spread slightly, as if they might reveal something hidden in his palms. "Now I'm not sure," he said. "Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe faith is the ability to stand in the dark and still take a step forward." The priest nodded with quiet approval. "Faith," he said, "is continuing even when you don't have proof the next step is safe. It's the courage to love, to hope, to forgive without a guarantee." Elon breathed out through his nose. "I've taken a lot of leaps," he said, "but never one without calculation." "That's why this leap," the priest replied gently, "might be the most difficult and the most necessary." Elon looked toward the altar again. He didn't know what he expected to see. A sign? A flicker of something sacred? No, he knew better. He wasn't looking for miracles. He was looking for peace. "Can someone like me begin now?" he asked, the question more breath than sound. The priest turned toward him, voice warm and certain. "Faith doesn't ask where you've been, only if you're ready to listen now." Elon didn't answer immediately. He looked at the pew beneath his hands, rubbing the worn grain of the wood with his thumb. "I can't pray like she did," he said. "I don't know the words." "She didn't pray with words," the priest replied. "She prayed with trust." Elon smiled softly. Not the polished kind, just a small, real curve of the mouth. "I think she'd be happy to know I'm here," he said, "sitting in the same pew where she used to kneel." "She would," the priest said, "and maybe she does know." Elon nodded, his eyes suddenly moist. He reached down and touched the side of the bench, fingers gently brushing the place where she might have once rested her hand. The grain was smooth, softened by time and use. "Maybe she's still here," he said, voice hushed. "Just not the way I used to think." The priest didn't speak. He didn't need to. The light continued to fall through the window, wrapping them both in a quiet mosaic of color and warmth. And for a long moment, neither man moved. The air was full, not of answers, but of presence. And Elon, for the first time in his life, didn't need proof. The church bell rang softly overhead, its tone round and gentle, not insistent, just a reminder that time was still passing. It was noon. Elon barely noticed at first. But the priest, who had been sitting beside him in steady silence, glanced at a small wristwatch hidden beneath the sleeve of his gray coat. He sighed, not from impatience, but with the soft reluctance of someone leaving a sacred space. "I have a commitment across town," he said quietly, standing, "but I'll be back soon." Elon turned to him, almost startled, as if surfacing from somewhere deep. "Do you mind if I stay a while?" he asked. The priest gave him a kind look, one that didn't need translation. "Of course," he said. "This house is yours too." He placed a hand gently on Elon's shoulder. No words were exchanged beyond that, but the touch conveyed something older than language: permission, reassurance, trust. As the priest stepped down the aisle, his footsteps soft against the wood, Elon remained seated. He waited until the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind the man, leaving the church still again. Only then did he breathe out. He turned back to the bench, to the items resting in his lap. The letter from his mother, now worn at the creases from rereading, and the small leather-bound notebook filled with her handwritten prayers. He opened the diary slowly, as if turning its pages too quickly might disturb the air. He read one entry aloud softly: "My son, it is never too late to return to light." The words caught in his chest. He closed his eyes. How many times had he dismissed people who spoke of light, of peace? He had built engines that tore free from Earth's gravity, but he had never built something that made him feel held. As he sat with the thought, something shifted beside him. A soft sound, paper against wood. He looked down and saw a pale envelope resting near the edge of the pew. It hadn't been there before. The priest must have left it on his way out, discreetly. Elon picked it up and turned it over. On the front, in neat, slightly shaky handwriting, was his name. He opened it carefully, revealing a folded note card and a smaller sheet of stationery inside. The note card read, "If this conversation ever comes to pass, perhaps these words will help. F." He unfolded the second page. The handwriting was different now, older, more deliberate, and the letter was clearly not written recently. The ink had faded slightly, and the paper had softened at the folds. The priest had written this long ago, possibly unsure if Elon would ever read it. He began to read. "Dear Elon, I don't expect you to remember our first conversation. You were younger then, and not particularly interested in theology or theology professors. But even then, I saw something in your eyes. A brightness. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that comes from holding vast ideas. And also a quiet loneliness. The kind that doesn't show up in interviews or newspaper columns, but lingers just behind the eyes. I have seen it before in other brilliant men. Every great mind seems to carry a frightened child somewhere inside, hiding beneath the armor of success." Elon stopped reading for a moment. His hand went to his mouth, not to hide emotion, but to anchor it. The letter went on. "You have built extraordinary things. But what I pray you find, more than glory, more than legacy, is rest. And not the kind that comes from sleep, but the kind that comes from being seen and loved anyway. If you are reading this, then perhaps something has softened. I hope so. I pray that you find your way not just among the stars, but back to the quiet corners of your own soul." Elon closed his eyes again. He didn't cry, but something inside him moved, like a tectonic shift far beneath the surface. He folded the letter slowly, with reverence, and placed it back into the envelope. Then he laid both the priest's letter and his mother's diary gently on the bench beside him. For a moment, he didn't think about anything. He didn't solve. He didn't plan. He didn't calculate. He just sat. Then the silence broke, not rudely, but undeniably. A vibration in his pocket. He reached for the phone, glancing at the screen. His assistant's name appeared, followed by the words, "Car is waiting. Gala dinner in 90 minutes. Guests arriving soon." He stared at the expectation folded inside that simple message. It was for a charity dinner, one he had sponsored, one he was scheduled to speak at. The world was waiting, polished suits, champagne, applause. He touched the screen. The green button to answer glowed softly, but he didn't press it. Instead, after a few seconds, he hit the red button. Decline. The sanctuary returned to silence. He set the phone down beside the envelope and just sat there, not in a hurry, not alone, just exactly where he needed to be. Elon stood in the quiet sanctuary, the hush around him almost sacred. The priest's letter, his mother's diary, and the old folded note were now tucked safely inside his inner jacket pocket, close to his chest. He pressed his palm there briefly, like a man steadying a relic. Not for show, not for memory, but because something within him had shifted, and he wanted to carry the evidence of it with reverence. He walked slowly down the aisle toward the altar. There were no other footsteps but his own. Each one echoed faintly, not loud, but certain, like a question hesitantly asked in a place used to holding silence. When he reached the front, he hesitated. The marble steps, the crucifix above, the stillness. He wasn't sure what made him do it. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was love. Or perhaps it was the absence of any words at all. He knelt. The bench was cold beneath his knees, but he didn't notice. He closed his eyes, not to think, not to retreat, but to remain in the moment. No prayer came, no formal request, no bargain with the heavens. Only presence and tears. Silent, unexpected tears slipped down his cheeks, surprising him in their gentleness. They weren't violent and they weren't shameful. They simply were. Grief and grace meeting in the middle. "If you're listening," he whispered, his voice so quiet it barely broke the air, "I just want you to know, thank you." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. He stayed there a while, not speaking, not thinking, just breathing, letting something inside him be still for the first time in a long while. When he finally rose, it was with no ceremony, no fanfare, only a deep breath, as if something had cleared inside him. He turned and looked up at the statue behind the altar. It was of a woman, Mary, he assumed, cradling a child in her arms. Her gaze was serene, not sad, and the child's small hand was reaching upward, touching her face. He stared at it for a long time. He hadn't grown up with statues like this. His world had been numbers, diagrams, equations, all measurable, all predictable. But this was something else. Not logic, not belief. It was tenderness. He felt something stir in his chest, something wordless and deep. As he made his way toward the exit, his eyes were caught by the small stone basin mounted near the door. The holy water font. He paused. Old habits rose up, skepticism, reason, dismissal. He had walked past things like this all his life. But this time, he didn't walk past. He reached out, slowly, and dipped 2 fingers into the water. Then he touched his forehead, not out of superstition, not out of tradition, but as a man accepting a mystery he couldn't fully name. Outside, the air had changed. The morning gray had begun to dissolve, and sunlight was pushing through the clouds in streaks, soft, golden, almost gentle. The wind carried the scent of grass and stone, the hush of early afternoon wrapping around him like a quiet embrace. He turned back toward the church, one last glance. The wooden door stood closed again, but not locked. He knew that now. It would always be open in one way or another. Off to the side, in the courtyard near a low brick wall, he spotted movement, small figures darting, laughing. Children. A group of them were playing tag, their shrieks of joy slicing through the air like birdsong. One boy tripped and fell, but was immediately surrounded by others helping him up, their faces wide with care and innocent kindness. Elon stood watching, hands in his pockets. He smiled softly, not just at their joy, but at the strange ache it stirred in him. That used to be him, didn't it? Running barefoot, scraped knees, a mother calling from the porch. It wasn't gone. Not really. He looked down at his phone. The screen was still blank from where he had declined the earlier call. But now he opened the contacts. His fingers hovered for a second, then moved. One ring, then another. Then a small voice, soft, cheerful, familiar. "Hello." He swallowed. "Maya? It's Daddy." A pause. "Hi. Are you at work?" A slight smile tugged at his mouth. "Sort of. I was thinking, and I was wondering something." "What?" "Would it be okay if I picked you up from school today?" The silence on the line wasn't silence at all. It was surprise. Warm, wide surprise. "Really? You? Like at the gate?" "Yes. Me. At the gate." "Okay," she said quickly. "Can you bring the music we like? The one with the stars?" He closed his eyes, a lump rising in his throat. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'll bring it." She giggled. "Okay, see you then." The line went dead. He stood there for a while, the phone still in his hand, the sound of children echoing behind him. And then he walked, quietly, steadily, toward the car, carrying letters in his pocket and something brighter in his chest. Something unnamed, something like light. The schoolyard was buzzing with the usual hum of late afternoon, children trailing out in uneven lines, backpacks bouncing, laughter spilling like sunlight on concrete. Cars lined the pickup lane, parents checking their phones, waving through windows. But Elon stood outside the main gate, hands in his pockets, waiting. He hadn't done this before, not like this. Usually, someone else handled pickup, someone paid to do what most parents would call ordinary. But today, he was here. When Maya spotted him from across the yard, her face lit up in that instant, golden way children have of loving without pause. "Daddy," she cried, breaking into a run. Before he could fully open his arms, she crashed into him, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. "You came." "I did," he said, kneeling to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Surprised?" She nodded with wide eyes and a delighted grin. "I thought it was going to be Jessica again." "Not today," he said softly. "Today I wanted to see you." She squeezed him again, this time tighter. Elon held on longer than usual. It wasn't for show. It wasn't rushed. Just a father holding his daughter as if time itself could be calmed by the stillness of a single embrace. On the ride home, Maya spoke with the carefree rhythm of someone who feels completely heard. "And we had music today. And I didn't mess up my lines in the play. And I made a picture. You want to see?" Elon nodded, actually listening. Not just nodding, not just waiting to talk, but really listening. It felt unfamiliar and holy. She rummaged through her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, already a little crinkled from a day. "I drew this in art," she said, unfolding it with care. The drawing showed a large red and orange rocket, cartoonish and bright. Inside the windows of the ship were little stick figures, a man, a woman, and a small girl with curly hair and a big smile. "That's us," she said, pointing. "So we can all go together, even to space, so we don't get separated." Elon stared at the picture. For a moment, his voice caught. "You think we could live on a rocket?" She shrugged. "Why not, if there's room for love inside?" His hand gripped the steering wheel just a little tighter. He swallowed. "I love your drawing," he said, "and your idea." She beamed, turning her attention to the window. He looked at her through the rearview mirror, his thoughts turning inward. After a quiet pause, he asked almost cautiously, "Maya, do you think I'm a good dad?" She tilted her head. He braced himself. "I think," she said slowly, "you're trying to be. And that's good." Her voice wasn't critical. It was matter of fact, clear-eyed in the way children sometimes are, truth spoken without sharpness. Elon laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that breaks through defenses. "Well," he said, "thank you. I'm trying harder now." "I can tell," she said. Then, with a yawn, she leaned against the window. At home, everything moved slower. Elon offered to help with her homework. She blinked at him, confused. "You sure?" "Why not?" he said, sitting down beside her at the kitchen table. They looked over her math problems together. He didn't understand all the new methods, the way they broke numbers into little grids and diagrams, but he pretended he did. She noticed, of course. "You're making that part up," she giggled, nudging his shoulder. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm good at pretending." "Me too," she said proudly. They finished the assignment, not quickly, but joyfully. He felt, for the first time in a long time, useful in a way that had nothing to do with machines or money. Dinner was simple. They warmed leftovers and sat at the table with music playing softly in the background, some instrumental piece Maya liked because it sounded like stars. They ate slowly, without rush, without distraction. She told him about a classmate with a pet snake and about a dream she'd had where birds talked in riddles. He listened to every word. After dinner, she brushed her teeth while he picked out a book to read, but before he could open it, she crawled under the blanket and looked at him expectantly. "Will you tell me a story instead?" "A story?" "Yeah, not from a book. One of yours." He paused, then smiled. "Okay," he said, settling in beside her. "When I was your age, maybe even a little younger, we lived in a house with a garden full of lemon trees. One day, I tried to build a robot out of old metal parts one found in the garage. Her eyes lit up. A robot! He nodded. It didn't work. It fell over and made a terrible sound. I was so mad I almost cried. What happened next? My mom, your grandma, came outside. She didn't fix it, but she sat next to me, and we drank tea. And she said, even broken things teach us something. Maya lay still, absorbing his words. Did you ever build another one? I did, he said. A lot of them. Some worked, some didn't. She smiled and nestled into her pillow. I like that story, she murmured. Elon leaned in and kissed her forehead. Me too. As he turned off the lamp and pulled the door nearly shut behind him, he paused in the hallway. The silence of the house wrapped around him gently, not like absence, but like presence. Tonight, he hadn't been a CEO or a headline or a symbol of ambition. He had simply been a father, and it was enough. The next morning, Elon found himself standing before a house he hadn't seen in years. It looked smaller than he remembered. The paint had faded from once hopeful whites to tired shades of gray. The garden had grown wild, unbothered by the seasons. The windows, clouded with dust, gave no hint of the lives once lived behind them. But the door was still there, the same dark wood with the faint scratch from where a young boy once practiced carving the first letter of his name. He turned the old key, he still had it, and stepped inside. The air was still. It didn't smell of mold or decay, only of time left untouched. Dust danced slowly in the beams of morning light that entered through half-closed blinds. Each step he took echoed softly, like a whisper from the walls themselves. He walked through the living room first. The furniture had been removed, but the shape of the rug was still outlined on the floor. He could almost hear the sound of his mother's laugh rising above a vinyl record spinning faintly in the background. For a second, it felt like if he turned quickly, she'd be there, standing by the couch, wiping flour from her hands, saying his name in that warm, half-sung tone. He didn't call out. He knew better. He moved down the hallway, his footsteps slower now, heavier. Her bedroom door creaked open with a reluctant sigh. It was almost intact, her room, preserved by habit, maybe by reverence. The bed was still made, though the quilt had faded in color. A cross hung gently above the headboard. There were old photographs on the dresser, one of Elon as a child, grinning with gaps in his teeth, another of her and his father, long before things grew difficult. And then there was the note, a square of yellowing paper tucked under a glass perfume bottle. Written in her familiar script, graceful and looping. Love leaves traces. Elon picked it up carefully, as if afraid it might crumble. He read the words twice, then again. He wasn't sure if she had written it for herself or for someone else. But now it was his. On the edge of the dresser sat a folded handkerchief, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the corner. He brought it to his face. The scent was barely there, but it was hers. Lavender, a trace of warmth, a whisper of the past that still lingered. He didn't cry, not in that moment. The ache was too deep for tears. It pulsed quietly like a second heartbeat. On the shelf near the window was something unexpected, a small, worn recipe notebook. Its pages were soft with age, smudged by flour and the weight of memory. He opened it gently. Handwritten notes filled every margin. Add cinnamon if he's had a bad day. He likes the crust crisp, not soft. And on one page, at the top, in her neat handwriting, for when Elon feels homesick. He closed the notebook, holding it to his chest. It felt like a blessing. Outside, sunlight filtered through the trees as he stepped back into the yard. The air was different here, less sterile, more honest. He walked toward the back, where an old tree still stood tall. Its branches reached toward the sky as if it, too, had grown older but refused to fall. This was the tree he used to climb, where he scraped his knees, where he dreamed of the stars, where he sometimes cried and sometimes laughed and sometimes just sat, waiting for nothing. He placed a hand on its trunk. The bark was rough but familiar, like the hand of an old friend. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between them was full. From behind the fence, a voice called out, "Elon." He turned to see an elderly man, stooped but bright-eyed, watching him from the yard next door. "Mr. Halloran," Elon said, surprised. "You're still here." "I'm always here," the man chuckled. "Somebody's got to keep the neighborhood standing." They moved closer. No rush, just two people on the edge of time. "She was a good woman," Mr. Halloran said softly. "Your mother. She brought me soup every time my arthritis flared up, prayed for me more than my own children did." Elon smiled, his throat tightening. "She believed in kindness," he said. "She lived it," the old man replied. "And she believed in you. Always, even when you didn't know what to believe in yourself." They stood there a while, two shadows stretching gently on the grass, talking about old gardens, the time the power went out, and his mother lit every candle in the house like it was Christmas. How she once ran outside in the rain just to show Elon how beautiful it could be to dance when everyone else was hiding. Eventually they parted. Elon walked back to the car slowly, the recipe book still in his hands. Before stepping inside, he looked back one last time. The house wasn't just old wood and dust. It was memory. It was prayer. It was presence. And as he sat behind the wheel, a sense of peace he hadn't known in years began to settle, quietly, gently, as if something within him, long restless, had finally found its place again. The following Sunday, the heavy wooden doors of the little red brick church creaked open quietly. Elon entered without fanfare, dressed in muted tones, his presence calm but unmistakable. He paused near the back, letting the scent of incense and old wood settle over him like a familiar blanket. The same sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting gentle colors across the aisle. For a moment, he stood there, just another soul returning to a place that had once held a message he hadn't been ready to hear. The priest saw him at once. From the front of the church, as the final hymn faded and the congregation gathered their coats and children, the priest met Elon's gaze. His pale blue eyes sparkled, not with surprise, but with the quiet recognition of something sacred fulfilled. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and gestured softly toward the back pew. After the last parishioner had left, Elon remained seated, his fingers gently brushing the worn wood of the pew. The priest joined him, sitting slowly, as if lowering himself into a shared memory. Neither spoke for a moment. It wasn't necessary. Then Elon exhaled, voice low but steady. "The conversation we had, it changed everything." The priest turned slightly, listening with full attention. "I didn't realize how much I'd shut myself off, how far I drifted. That letter, her words, your presence, it broke something open in me," Elon continued. "And I think maybe something needed to break." The priest didn't interrupt, only nodded, his lined face reflecting both peace and pain, the look of someone who has waited for healing to arrive like spring after a long frost. "I started cooking again," Elon said, a small smile touching his lips. "With Maya. Nothing special. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, whatever she asks for. But I let her take the lead. I actually listen now." There was something boyish in the way he said it, as if those mornings in the kitchen had given him back a piece of himself. "I had forgotten," he said more quietly, "that I'm human before I'm anything else. Before the work, before the headlines, before the pressure to be invincible." The priest's eyes grew glassy. He blinked slowly, the emotion resting just behind his lashes. "That," he said gently, "is all your mother ever hoped for." Elon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. He handed it to the priest with both hands reverently. "This is for the community, to help whoever needs help the most." The priest hesitated, his fingers hovering above the envelope. "You know, she used to say real wealth isn't counted in dollars." "I remember," Elon said. "She said the only treasure worth storing up was kindness." The priest finally took the envelope, not for the number written on the check, but for the tenderness with which it had been given. It was a bridge, not a donation, a sign of gratitude, a hand reaching backward through time. Then Elon took a second envelope from a different pocket, larger, thicker, with a single paperclip securing a sheaf of documents. "This," he said, "is something I've been thinking about since that day." The priest accepted it, unfolding the cover page. At the top, in bold letters, was the name. Casa May, a sanctuary for mothers and children. "I want to build a center," Elon said, "for single mothers, for women who've had to carry too much, too alone. It'll have housing, meals, legal support, whatever they need to breathe again. I want it to be a place of dignity, not charity." The priest looked at the documents as if they were a sacred text. "Your mother would weep," he said. "She believed every woman deserved to feel safe, to be seen." "She was always building sanctuaries in her own way," Elon replied. "In kitchens, in lullabies. This is the only way I know to keep that going." The priest laid a hand over the documents. His palm trembled slightly, not from age, but from awe. "You're not just honoring her, Elon. You're letting her bloom again, through you." A long silence followed, not empty, but full, of all that had been said and all that didn't need to be. They both turned their eyes toward the stained glass window above the altar. The afternoon sun had found its perfect angle, and colors spilled across the pews like spilled grace, violet, amber, blue. In the center of the glass was an image of a woman cradling a child, the folds of her robe shimmering like water. They sat that way for a long time. Two men, one old, one older than he realized. Not speaking, but witnessing something quietly extraordinary. Redemption that didn't announce itself. Healing that didn't hurry. Love passed down in crumbs and notes and second chances, finally returning to where it had begun. In the hush of that sacred space, Elon felt something settle in his bones. Not closure, exactly, but peace. Not an ending, but a beginning again. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. Elon didn't make any declarations, no bold resolutions, no sweeping overhauls. But something inside had shifted, and like the slow turning of a river's course, his days began to flow in a different direction. He began by turning off his notifications. Not all of them, just the ones that used to clamor for his attention every waking hour. The constant stream of updates, reports, alerts, he silenced them. In their absence, he noticed something he hadn't in a long time. Silence. Not emptiness, but a gentle kind of space. A room for breath. Meetings were moved. Not canceled, just postponed. And in their place, he sat at the breakfast table longer than usual. Maya would chatter about her day ahead, about a class pet, a new friend, a crayon drawing, and Elon would listen. Not just with nods or glances at his watch. He listened fully, like someone rediscovering the value of sound. He picked up a pen again, not to sign contracts or sketch ideas for satellites, but to write. Handwritten notes, letters he would never send. Thoughts that came to him in the stillness before dawn. Memories, longings, gratitudes. His handwriting, once hurried and sharp, began to soften, as if his hand was remembering a gentler rhythm. Every morning, before the world intruded, he opened the small leather-bound journal his mother had kept, the one the priest had given him. He read only a few lines each day, always aloud, always quietly. Her words had become a kind of liturgy. "The world is loud, my son. Let your kindness be the thing that speaks loudest." He carried that sentence in his coat pocket now. One morning, after days of internal debate, he opened his messaging app and typed out a short message to his father. Just a few words. "Hope you're well. Thinking of you." It took longer to hit send than to write the message. He didn't expect a reply. And when one came, days later, simple and awkward, it was enough. The bridge hadn't been rebuilt, but the stones had been placed. That was something. As the days passed, he began to reach out to old friends. People he drifted from not out of anger, but ambition. The kind of people who had once known him before he became Elon Musk. Some responded with surprise, some with warmth, all with grace. In every reconnection, he discovered a little more of himself, fragments he had left behind on the climb up. Then came the invitation to speak, another conference, another stage. Normally, he would have used it to unveil a new concept, to tease an innovation. But this time, he brought nothing but his story. No slides, No demos, just truth. He stood before a sea of faces and told them about the day an old priest handed him a letter. About the voice of a mother long gone, speaking truths he hadn't known he needed. He spoke of Miss Chance's small gestures, a daughter's drawing of a rocket ship with a family inside. "I'm not here to sell you anything," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just here to remind you that life, real life, is not measured in charts or headlines. It's in quiet moments, in forgiveness, in presence." The auditorium didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled, a long, reverent silence. And then something more sacred than cheering. Tears, nods, hearts opening quietly in the dim light. In the days that followed, his assistant brought him a box overflowing with envelopes. Letters, hundreds of them, from strangers. Each one a confession, a thank you, a story. People who had watched his talk and felt something stir. One letter came from a woman in Michigan. She was 78. Her handwriting was fragile, but every loop and line felt deliberate. "You reminded me of my son," she wrote. "We haven't spoken in 12 years. I just called him. I told him I forgive him. Thank you." Elon held that letter for a long time. He read it again, then again, and when he finally placed it back in a box, something in him eased. Something tight and long-held let go. That night, he sat on the porch, watching Maya draw planets in chalk across the pavement, and he felt it, not joy, not pride, but peace. A rare, humbling peace that had nothing to do with accomplishment. He turned to her and said softly, "Did you know your grandma used to hum while she cooked?" Maya looked up and smiled. "Like you do now." He hadn't noticed. But yes, he did. That night, before bed, he took out a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote only one line. "Legacy is not what we build. It's who we become and what we heal along the way." And for the first time in a very long while, he turned out the light, not thinking of what was next, but grateful for what was already here. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long golden stripes across the wooden floor of the kitchen. The calendar hanging beside the refrigerator bore a small red circle around today's date, June 28th. Elon stared at it for a moment before brushing his fingers lightly over the paper. His mother's birthday. He rose earlier than usual, the house still quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He didn't put on a suit or reach for a crisp shirt like he usually did. Today called for something different, something simple. A soft navy sweater, worn jeans, and bare feet on cold tile. No need to impress. Just remember. As he moved toward the kitchen, the sound of small footsteps followed. Maya appeared, still wearing her star-patterned pajamas, her curls frizzy from sleep, and her eyes wide with quiet understanding. "Is it Grandma May's birthday?" she asked. Elon nodded, smiling gently. "Yes, baby, it is." They cooked together, moving in unspoken rhythm. Elon cracked eggs, while Maya mixed the batter, flour dusting her small nose. They made pancakes with honey, the way May always had. The smell filled the kitchen, and Elon swore for a moment he could almost hear her humming from some distant corner of memory. When the pancakes were stacked on the table, Elon placed a framed photo of May at the center, surrounded by a small bundle of fresh wildflowers he and Maya had picked the day before. A sunflower leaned sideways from the bunch, tall and proud. Maya added her own touch, a paper heart colored in pink crayon, folded 3 times, then nestled between the flowers. They both sat, hands joined, eyes closed. No prayer was spoken aloud, but the silence itself felt like one. After a long pause, Maya opened her eyes and looked at the photo. "Do you think she can see us?" Elon considered his answer carefully. "I think she sees us in her own way," he said softly. "Maybe not with her eyes, but I believe she knows. I feel like she's smiling right now." Maya tilted her head and nodded, her hazel eyes glistening with curiosity and something unspoken. Something deeper than most 7-year-olds could express, but Maya often did without trying. Later that morning, they drove together to a modest, light-filled building nestled near a quiet park, Casa May. It had opened just 2 weeks ago, a center Elon had poured himself into, designed to offer support to single mothers, especially those in vulnerable situations. It had been inspired entirely by May's memory, her resilience, her compassion. As they walked through the front doors, the scent of new beginnings, fresh paint, warm food, and children's laughter greeted them. Elon took in the space slowly, women chatting over tea, others bouncing babies on their hips, a few resting in reading nooks. There was life here. Not grand, not loud, but rooted. Like May, staff members and visitors approached him with thanks, but Elon deflected the spotlight. He sat down with a young mother reading to her toddler and listened. He joined an older woman folding donated clothes and helped. He sat in a quiet corner with a teenager who had just arrived, visibly scared, and held space for her tears. Every hand he shook, every story he heard, felt like a thread being tied between his mother's spirit and the world she left behind. This wasn't a monument. It was a continuation. Outside, in the community garden behind the center, a small ceremony waited. Maya walked beside him, holding a pink ribbon in her hand. Elon carried a young magnolia tree, its roots bundled carefully, its blossoms barely beginning to open. They stopped at the chosen spot, a small circle of freshly turned soil beneath a patch of gentle morning sun. Elon knelt, his hands steady as he dug, and placed the tree with care. He smoothed the dirt with his palms and stood slowly, brushing earth from his jeans. Maya approached the small tree and tied her pink ribbon to one of the lower branches. It fluttered gently in the breeze. A small plaque at the base of the magnolia read, "For May, who taught us what it means to care." Elon stepped back, his eyes fixed on the leaves that moved softly above the soil. The wind carried the faint scent of blossoms and honey. Maya slipped her hand into his. "Do trees grow better when they're planted with love?" she asked. He looked down at her, his voice catching for a moment. "I think they do. I think they remember who put them there." They stood together in silence, the way they had that morning. The way he once stood with his mother beneath a different tree, in a different time, asking questions with his eyes that only love could answer. As they turned to leave, Elon glanced up at the sky, clear now, wide and calm. No clouds, no rush, just a stillness that felt earned. When they reached the car, Maya climbed into the back seat, humming to herself. Elon lingered for a moment before getting in, looking back at the magnolia one last time. "Happy birthday, Mom," he whispered. And in the hush that followed, he felt it again, that quiet warmth inside him. Not grief, not guilt, something else, something like peace. The evening had a hush to it, one of those quiet, amber-lit hours when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Elon sat at his old writing desk, the one he'd never used much until now. A cup of lukewarm tea rested beside a stack of cream-colored stationery. His pen hovered over the page, then touched down with slow, deliberate strokes. "To my Maya." It was the first letter, one of many he intended to write. He had been thinking about it for days, how a single piece of paper, folded neatly and left behind, had managed to change the entire direction of his life. His mother's words had cut through layers of ambition and distance like sunlight cutting through heavy fog. He realized he wanted to leave Maya more than just inventions or photos. He wanted her to hear his voice years from now, when he might no longer be around to speak. So he wrote, one letter each month, sealed and dated, meant for a time when Maya would be older, perhaps grown, perhaps struggling, perhaps seeking. Each letter held something different: confessions, advice, memories, questions he'd never had answers to when he was younger. "If you ever feel lost," he wrote in one, "go back to what is simple. A cup of tea, the smell of home, your mother's favorite song. Love never hides in noise." He didn't write as a man who had built rockets or led companies. He wrote as a man who had failed, who had doubted, who had learned too late, but decided it was never truly too late. The letters had no pretense, no attempts to preserve a perfect image. Some pages had crossed out words, others ink smudges where his hand hesitated. He told her about his fears, that he sometimes still felt like the boy trying to earn a father's approval, or the man who buried his grief in accomplishments. And alongside the letters, he began something else, a journal. Not of strategy or deadlines, but of life. He filled it with Maya's phrases, the odd and beautiful wisdom that only children offer. Daddy, do stars talk to each other? Why do hugs feel like bandages? He wrote about dreams he hadn't remembered in decades, like the one where his mother stood on the porch, barefoot and glowing, singing softly in Afrikaans. He jotted down the scent of Maya's shampoo after a bath, the feel of her small hand wrapped in his, the silence they sometimes shared when words weren't needed. What surprised him most was how these acts, writing, remembering, noticing, began to change him. He slowed down. He canceled 2 meetings just to watch Maya play in the sprinkler one afternoon. He turned off all notifications on his phone. Instead of rushing through bedtime, he lingered in her doorway after tucking her in, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering how he had ever let himself drift so far from this. At Christmas, he sat down and hand-wrote cards. Not printed, not signed by an assistant. Just him, a pen, and time. He sent them to old colleagues, distant cousins, even a teacher from childhood. Some came back with thank you notes, others with silence. But it wasn't about the reply. It was about the stitch, each letter a small thread sewing together a past he had once thought was too far gone. One rainy afternoon, as the scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen, Maya padded into his office barefoot, holding one of the sealed envelopes. She had found it in his drawer, where her name was written on the front in his unmistakable handwriting. "Daddy," she asked, her voice soft but curious, "is this really for me?" He looked up, startled for a moment. Then his face softened. "Yes, it is. But it's one you can read later, when you feel like it's the right time." She nodded slowly, holding it like a treasure, and then climbed onto his lap without another word. He held her close, the silence between them deep and kind. That night, after she had gone to sleep, he stood at the window, watching the wind sway the trees. His reflection in the glass no longer looked like someone running from something. It looked like someone finally arriving. He thought of his mother, how she had written that one letter knowing she might never see him read it. How her words had traveled through time like a lantern through fog, finding him when he was ready to be found. He thought of Maya, one day a woman, opening an envelope and discovering that her father had never stopped loving her, not for a second, not even when he was busy or distant or unsure of himself. Legacy, he now understood, wasn't built in labs or launched from platforms. It was built in rooms like this, in letters, in unhurried dinners, in lullabies sung with a cracking voice, in a child's laughter echoing through a hallway. And it lived not in stone, but in paper, not in buildings, but in hearts. As he sealed another envelope, he whispered to himself, "This is for her. For when I'm no longer the one who can answer her questions. For when she needs to hear my voice." And in the flicker of candlelight, with pen in hand, Elon Musk, father, son, man, made a quiet promise that the thread would never be broken again. That love, once reclaimed, would not go silent. That these letters, like his mother's, would one day find their way through time and memory and need and remind Maya, "You are not alone. Not now. Not ever." The morning unfolded slowly, like a memory remembered without urgency. The sun had not yet fully risen, but light was beginning to gather along the edges of the sky, painting soft gold across the horizon. Elon sat on the porch of the small country house, a ceramic mug of herbal tea warming his hands, the steam curling into the cool air like breath made visible. Everything was still, not silent from emptiness, but from something much rarer, peace. The porch's wooden boards creaked gently beneath him as he shifted his weight. Beside him, resting atop a folded blanket, was the now familiar envelope. The edges were worn, the paper softened by the touch of many rereads. He didn't open it this time. He hadn't for weeks. But somehow, it no longer needed to be read to be heard. The words had taken up residence in him, like the slow blooming of a season long overdue. "You don't have to earn your worth, my son," her handwriting had whispered into his past. "You were always enough, even before the world knew your name." He exhaled slowly. The magnolia tree in the yard caught his eye, its branches fuller now than when he and Maya had planted it months earlier. It had taken to the soil with surprising eagerness, as if the memory of May had fed its roots. The pink ribbon Maya had tied to the lowest branch danced lazily in the breeze. No sound came from it, but it spoke anyway. Behind him, the screen door clicked gently. Small footsteps shuffled across the porch floor. Maya emerged in her pajamas, her hair a halo of curls gone wild from sleep. Her cheeks were still flushed from dreams, her eyes heavy but curious. Without a word, she climbed into his lap, knees tucked, arms circling his waist like she'd done since she was old enough to walk. Elon pulled the blanket over them both and kissed the top of her head. He rested his chin there, just breathing her in. She smelled of cinnamon and fabric softener, and the secret magic children seemed to carry without knowing it. "Did Grandma really write that letter just for you?" she asked after a while, her voice small. "She did," he answered, pausing. "But I think maybe she wrote it for the version of me I hadn't become yet, the one I'm still trying to be." Maya leaned back slightly to look up at him. "I think she would like you now." The words hit him like a wave, so simple, so pure, and entirely unfiltered. He smiled, blinking quickly, and held her tighter. They watched the morning together, the pale clouds shifting above the fields, birds crossing the sky in loose, joyful formations. Insects buzzed softly in the grass. It was all ordinary and sacred at once. He thought of the priest again, the old man with pale blue eyes and hands that trembled only when offering truth. Elon had walked into that church carrying decades of pressure, self-inflicted and otherwise. But it had been the stillness, the gentle hum of something greater, that began to unravel the knots he hadn't even known were choking him. How many years had he spent searching the stars for belonging, building legacies in steel and flame, as if immortality could be engineered? Now he understood. Legacy was not the rocket that carried your name across the sky. It was the silence that followed when your daughter curled up in your lap and trusted you enough to ask about your soul. His mind drifted briefly to the diary May had left behind. He still read it sometimes, just a line or two before bed. But even when he didn't, he felt her presence in how he brewed tea, how he reached for Maya's hand in parking lots, how he paused before responding to a difficult question. Her gentleness had woven itself into his days like sunlight through curtains. Maya wriggled out of his lap and stood barefoot on the porch railing, balancing like a little tightrope walker. "Careful," he said instinctively, and she grinned. "I'm okay," she declared, arms outstretched like wings. "Just pretending to fly." He watched her for a moment, heart full and aching in equal parts. So much of life, he realized, was about this, showing up when it was messy, loving without needing to fix, trusting that the small things, breakfasts together, letters written in quiet hours, hugs held a little longer, mattered more than applause. Inside the house, a fresh stack of envelopes sat in the top drawer of his writing desk. One for each month. Letters to Maya. Letters for someday. Some were short, just a single thought scribbled before sleep. Others were long, filled with memories, confessions, even the things he was still trying to forgive himself for. One line had become his favorite to write. "If you ever feel lost, return to what is simple. Love, kindness, time shared without hurry." Maya jumped down, landed softly, and sat beside him again. "Can I read one of the letters?" she asked. He hesitated. "Sure," he said gently, "but maybe not today. Maybe on a day when you need to feel something and don't quite know what it is." She nodded, satisfied with the mystery. The ribbon on the magnolia tree fluttered again. Elon followed its movement, and for a brief second, he could almost hear May's voice. Not speaking words, but present. Not correcting or guiding, just watching, maybe even smiling. He looked at Maya and whispered, "Thank you for making me slow down." She grinned. "You were very fast before." "Too fast," he agreed. The wind picked up, not in a hurry, just enough to rustle the branches. And in that rustling, in that sunlight, in that silence, something wholly lingered. What about you, dear viewer? Did this chapter bring someone to your heart? Leave a memory in the comments, something simple, something true. I read everyone with care. Yellow Heart,